Welcome back. In Module 3, we'll be covering Active Directory domain services. We'll talk about some of the improvements and the migration procedures involved in moving from old versions of Windows Server's Active Directory up to the latest with Windows Server 2012 R2. So, as we start taking a look at some of the changes, probably the important thing here is that if you haven't used any of these tools before, initially some of them may seem complex, but as we start going through them all, you'll find that it actually does start getting simpler. And generally the way that the tools work is that they will follow Microsoft best practices. So why is there so much Windows PowerShell? Well, this is something that Microsoft has been recommending that people involved in IT and the management of Windows Server environments should have been taking a look at for a while now. But by using PowerShell, it means that you can start automating things, you can script any component, and this is something that is a very important skill moving forward, both in the on-premise Windows Server world, as well as in the online world with things like Windows Azure, as well as Microsoft's other online services, including Office 365. So a big change now is that AD prep is now something that you can't just type in AD prep and have a domain controller promote itself. You can still run it at the command line, but you do need to feed it some command line parameters in order for it to actually work. But what you can also do now is run the DC promo capabilities by using the new server management tools as well, if you want to. Now, when AD prep does run, one of the pieces it does, it will do a prerequisite validation check. So it will look for errors before it proceeds the installation. So instead of getting part way through and saying that you've missed out on a few of the necessary pre-requirements, it will sort those out and give you the opportunity to correct them before you proceed. Now, other things you've got are a new configuration page layout. So the idea here is to try to make it easier for you to make the right choices around what it is that you want to install and minimize the number of steps and the amount of time it takes to actually complete the domain controller installation. And another thing here is you've got the wizard to be able to go through very easily and export AD installation settings into PowerShell. So you run through the wizard and it will generate the settings that are required for you to proceed. So some of the other new services that you've got, or other new features that you've got inside of ADDS, you've got Active Directory Domain Controller cloning, whereas in the past this was something that was really frowned upon. One of the changes that has occurred with more recent versions of Active Directory is the generation ID UID, so the unique identifier, which means that the hypervisor layer can recognize that and knows what to do in terms of recognizing the version it is and whether it's a good version to bring online or not. And now there's other capabilities. You've got the Windows PowerShell script generation, which we just covered. When it comes to simplified administration, now we just use the server manager to go through and perform a lot of the common tasks, and also as the launch pad for when we do need to launch other Active Directory domain services tools. But now that server manager tool itself is really just a front end to PowerShell. So anything that it's performing for you is also something that you can automate. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're performing tasks over and over again and thinking that there must be an easier way of doing this, so it could be something as simple as adding users, removing users, for example. They're pretty good candidates to start off with PowerShell. But obviously, as you start working more with PowerShell, you'll start getting an understanding of what its true capabilities really are. So other things to think about when you are looking at Active Directory domain services and doing domain controller promotion is things such as the schema extension, the forest prep, and the domain prep are all now just a part of the domain controller promotion. So these don't need to be performed as separate tasks, as separate tasks on specific servers such as the schema master. So again, one of the little things that they've done, we're just removing a couple of steps to make it a bit easier for you to do this upgrade. Now, it will also go through and do prerequisite checks on the forest and the domain itself. So not just the physical hardware and installation that you're working on, but making sure that there's as small a chance as possible for there to be any kind of failed or failures as you are trying to promote a new server to be a domain controller. So as we start taking a look at the Server Manager and Active Directory Domain Services integration, one of the nice things here is right out of the box, once we have set this up, we can see that ADDS, which is the shortcut for Active Directory Domain Services, is just listed there as a server role. So this is something where it will report back the health, so you can see manageability, you can see events, services, performance, best practice analyzer results. So the idea here is you've got this dashboard that will give you not just a view of this server, but if you do have multiple Active Directory domain servers, and in this case you can see that that number 4 alongside this indicates that there are 4 ADDS servers sitting there. So this means that you're actually getting that insight into all 4 machines through this simple console. What you've also got is the admin center recycle bin, so a much easier way of getting in and working with the recycle bin. So you can see here that we can access that, we can get access to the deleted objects, and if we do need to restore them through accidental deletions, it's very, very easy for us to do so. We've also got fine-grained password policy. So this is something now where we've got the because of the Active Directory module for PowerShell, you can either do this through the command line or you can do it through the tool here. But once you start getting into the fine-grained password policy, you can see here that you start getting more options in terms of who do you start applying these changes in passwords to. And we'll take a closer look at this as we go through the demonstration. We can also go through and use the Active Directory Admin Center. So again, we can use tools that are built around PowerShell even though they're presenting it in a GUI fashion, and we can actually then take a look at what it's exporting as PowerShell. So once we've got it exported, that makes it very easy for us to copy it out, save it in a text file, and then reuse it again when we do need that. So it makes it a lot easier for you to start picking up on PowerShell without having to go through and figure it all out yourself. Use what Microsoft does as a launchpad to allow you to start piecing together solutions that are a bit more customized for your requirements. So when we do the Active Directory Domain Services role installation, we can do this easily through Server Manager, we can do it through PowerShell, and also just running, as I mentioned earlier, if you just try to run DC Promo on its own, it's not going to launch a console or a GUI tool that then does the DC promo and asks if you want a DNS server, etc. That's something where you can feed it those details and it will do it automatically, but it's not something that works the way that it used to with previous versions of Windows Server. So as we take a look here and we take a look at the Add Roles and Features wizard, which is a key part of the Server Manager in Windows Server 2012 and Server 2012 R2, and it's very, very easy for us just to select Active Directory Domain Services. You'll see here that it's something that does appear under Server Roles. And alternatively, if we did want to do that through PowerShell, we just use the add-Windows feature space ad-domain-services, and that will go through and install that module for us. So again, it's whatever you're comfortable with, but what I'd strongly suggest is making sure you've spent some time with PowerShell, and this is something that's probably going to get a little bit repetitive as you go through all of the modules, but even just having a small understanding of PowerShell is something that is going to make a lot of admin tasks a lot easier as you start moving forward. So let's start taking a closer look. So when we take a look at the role configuration, what can we do? So through the Active Directory Domain Services configuration wizard, we can add a domain controller to an existing domain, we can add a new domain to an existing forest, or we could add a new forest. So if we were creating from scratch, you can see here that we can do that quite easily. Now, we've also got the ability to do that same thing and add a new forest, for example, through PowerShell, but most of the time when we're talking about migrations, you wouldn't be creating a new forest. Instead, you'd be looking at adding a domain controller to an existing environment. So let's start taking a look at some of the things that are happening inside of that PowerShell window. So what we're doing here is we're using the install-adds forest PowerShell commandlet, and then the domain name is corp.contoso.com, and obviously we need to supply a safe mode admin password. So we supply that, and you can see here that it is being protected so that other people can't look over our shoulder and see what it is that we're typing. But remember, with this recovery or the safe mode admin password, make sure that you do keep a copy of that somewhere. So now for creating a forest root domain with Server Manager, if we take a look at this just from a quick flowchart perspective, it's pretty easy to start with. So if we start at the top with the forest deployment, we need to deploy the configuration, we need to configure the domain controller options, then we've got the DNS options that we need to deal with. So for a lot of organizations, if they are deploying a new domain environment, or a new forest, it may be the opportunity to go back and revisit what they've done with domain names. So if they've used a .local in the past, but they're at the point now where they'd rather, for the sake of simplicity, move everyone across to a .com.au, for example, that's something that you can do very, very easily. Now, there are more options. So you could select the paths that you want it to go through. Then you can go through, you can review the options. Then once you've reviewed those, the prereq check will kick in. If it passes, installation will occur. If it fails, you go back to review the options. Now, this is where you can also use that review options screen to export the script, so that if it's something that you want to take out to other locations, customize, or you've got multiple servers within the same customer that you need to promote to domain controllers, it's very easy for you to keep reusing that script over and over again. So now let's jump into the demonstration and let's take a look at the migration of a legacy domain controller across to Windows Server 2012 R2. So let's switch across to our virtual machine. In this video, what we'll do is we'll go through and first of all we'll raise the forest functional level. So even though this is a Windows Server 2008 machine that I'm on, you have to remember that you can't raise a Windows Server 2003 server to anything above a 2003 level. So we need to effectively move the 2003 DCs off the network and then leave the 2008 servers that are in place and prepare those to be able to move up to a higher level of an Active Directory domain and forest functional level. So let's go through this process. So all we need to do is go into Active Directory Domains and Trusts. We can select that, and we can see here we've got the domains and trusts, we've got the forest, we've got the domain, and if I go into the domain, what I can do here is raise the domain functional level, and because we're going to be introducing some Windows Server 2012 R2 in here, we might as well take it to the highest version of Windows Server 2008 that it can take, which is R2 in this case. So if we go through and we'll raise this, the little warning that it gives us here is that it wants us that the effect changes the entire domain. But because in this case it's a pretty small domain, we don't have lots of sites, we don't have slow site links or anything like that, it's safe for me to go through and proceed with this. And it tells me straight away that it was raised, but it may take time to replicate around our network, but in our case it's not really an issue. Now, what we can do next is we can raise the forest functional level. So that's currently sitting at 2008. So what I can also do with this is raise the forest functional level to 2008 R2 as well. So the same type of warning pops up saying it will affect the entire forest, that it's not reversible, and it will say again that it was successful, and it may take a bit of time for all of this information to replicate through the network. So that's really the primary thing that we need to do down on the previous OS side. So what do we need to do next? So from here we need to jump across to one of our other machines, which is one of the target domain controllers. So when we take a look at this target domain controller and what's happening with it, first of all, we'll see that it's not actually set up as a domain controller yet. So if we go in and we take a look at the system properties, what can we see about this? We can see that it's part of a work group and then it's called target-DC1. So probably the first thing that we need to do is we actually start to, we need to add this into the network. So what I'll do first is go out of there, we'll go into Server Manager, and then inside of Server Manager, it's very easy for me to start adding the roles and features. So we've discussed the Add Roles and Features wizard, so it's a very easy one to follow. And we can just skip through a few things. It's a role or it's a feature. It's this server, and the role here is the Active Directory Domain Services. It gives me a preview of what it is actually going to install, as well as do I want to install the management tools. And in this case, yes, I definitely want the management tools. There's no additional features that I need to add. Actually, if we take a look through here, we'll see if there's anything in particular. No, there's nothing here that we really need, but if we take a look at the different PowerShell options here, we can see that there are some additional things that we can add in, but PowerShell 4 and the integrated environment are already included, so nothing really for us to change here. Now, as we go through here, a couple of things to note is that it will go through. It gives us the option to to start adding DNS into the environment as well, because so obviously we already need to have DNS running in an AD environment. And now for the confirmation, do we want to restart the computer automatically if needed? And I won't actually say yes to that. Instead, we'll just click on install and we'll watch the process occur. So this won't take too long for it to go through and perform the steps that it requires. So now while that's occurring, what I can also do is jump onto our second target domain controller. So if we take a look at what's going on with this server, and we go to System, we'll see the properties here. Again, it's a workgroup machine. It's called target-DC. So with that one, we'll run through the same process. So if we go into, if we go into Server Manager and add roles and features, so it'll just take a second, and we can pretty much just perform that same task. Now while that's running, what we can do here is we can jump back to the other domain controller that we had running, and it's telling me that the features have succeeded, but we'll notice that there's a little alert here saying that we need to promote this server to become a domain controller. So what's involved in this? So we've already seen a quick snapshot of this screen in the deck earlier. So what we can do here is we don't want to go through and create the new forest. Instead, we want to add the domain controller to an existing forest. So the domain that we want to add here is our upgrade-domain, which is what the previous version of Windows Server is running on. And the credentials that we want to use are upgrade domain /administrator and then password. Hopefully I've typed that in correctly. Now I'll just click on next. So what are the capabilities that we want installed on this domain controller? So in this case, we want it to be a DNS server. We want it to be a global catalog server. There's no real need for it to be a read-only domain controller because it's going to be one of the primary domain controllers. So we want to make sure that that's okay. So that's just taking a couple of seconds to run. And once that completes, what we want to do is just add a password in here as well. And I'll try to make sure that they match. So far, so good. So now we can see that for the DNS settings, that in this virtual lab environment, everything hasn't been completely set up yet. So we can just ignore that error and we can continue on. And what do we want to do here? So do we want to install from media? So a great option if you're in a remote location and you've got a large AD environment. But also here, it's a matter of, do we want to replicate from any specific domain controller? And it's like, look, we've only got one at the moment, so any domain controller is effectively the same answer. What do we want to do with the log file? So, in a lot of environments, you probably are going to move those off the C drive, but for this environment, we'll leave them as is. Now, we'll go through, we'll review the options. Everything looks okay. The prerequisite checks, we'll let those run to make sure that we don't have any errors that prevent us from running. It just takes a little while for it to go through and run this. And it's saying that even though there are a couple of things that it's, that it not quite complaining about, but warning us about a few things, all we have to do is click install and it will proceed. So there's nothing in here that's an absolute showstopper. So we can just click on that and that will go through. You'll see here that it's, as I mentioned in the deck, is that it will automatically go through and start doing things such as upgrading the schema and upgrading the forest automatically for you. Now, if we jump down to the target DC2, we should find that we're in a similar position where we can go through and we can now promote this machine to be the domain controller. So effectively, we can run through that exact same process. So the domain was upgrade domain. And the credentials were upgrade domain administrator. And the all-important password. So again, that's going to take a little while. So while that's running, let's just jump back quickly to target 1 DC. Okay, it's still running through. So so these things, these are virtual machines. So it is going to take a little bit longer than you would normally have in your production environment. But the idea here is just so that you can see the wizard that's involved. And in this case, it seems that everything has proceeded successfully, and it's warning me that I'm about to get signed out of that computer so that it can reboot and start up as a domain controller. So while that's happening, let's just jump back down to target DC2. And it's telling me that I can't reach upgrade domain. No, and that's because I typed in administrator incorrectly. And we'll just watch that for a couple of seconds and make sure that I've typed it incorrectly. And then we can go back to target DC. So what's it telling me? Upgradedomain.com could not be reached. That's okay, we can come back to that later in the modules, so we don't really need to worry too much. We'll just jump back to target DC where we know that everything is working the way it should. We'll send it a Control-Alt-Delete, upgrade domain administrator. I'll type in my new password. And what we can see here is that now I can't log in under a local account anymore because I'm now a domain controller. And once I'm in here, Server Manager will launch, and we can just do a quick look at some of the things that are included with Server Manager. So if we take a look at the local server, we should now see that this is a domain controller. It's part of a domain, so effectively we've seen that we've been able to promote it very, very easily. And what else can we do? We can jump down into the Active Directory domain services options here. We can take a look at different settings here. So if I wanted to jump into the Active Directory Admin Center tool that we mentioned earlier, that's just very easy for me to do. I can just go into that option on the left and now select the appropriate domain controller, and it's very easy for me to jump in and take a look at what's going on in here. So here's the upgrade domain.local. We can take a look at what's going on in here. If I want to start drilling down, we can take a look inside of users, and there are the different users that we've got set up already. So as you can see, it's very easy for me to go through and start setting this up, and from here it's quite easy for us to go through, start adding new users in. You can see here the different options we've got if we need to start resetting passwords, adding users to a group, etc. So a lot of us have been using Active Directory and users and computers for quite a long time, so moving across to this new environment can take a little bit of getting used to. But as I mentioned though, one of the benefits of using this new environment is that anything that we start doing, so if I go through and we do things such as reset password, if I add the administrator to a group, if I do a search on that particular thing, and if I just add them to replicator, for example, even though I don't really need to do that, what we can see here is that here is the actual PowerShell commandlet that was run in the background in order to do that. So if I wanted to copy that out, it's very easy for me to copy that out, save it in Notepad, and then get access to it in the future when I need to access similar functionality. So that's just a very quick look at promoting target domain controllers up to Windows Server 2012 R2. We saw raising the domain functional level in an older version of Windows Server. We saw raising the forest functional level on a previous version of Windows Server. So all up, you can see that it's quite an easy process to start using some of the new capabilities of Server 2012 R2's Server Manager to start adding these new capabilities in. And in this case, it was just very simple to add in Active Directory domain services. So now for the final slide, we'll just introduce the next module, which is growing infrastructure with Microsoft Azure. So we've spoken about a lot of the things that you can do to start upgrading your on-premises infrastructure. But for a lot of customers, one of the next steps is going to be how you help them move some of those existing workloads or potentially set up new workloads in the cloud. And from the Microsoft side, they really want this to happen inside of Azure, especially with the Azure Infrastructure as a Service virtual machine capabilities. So come back for the next module and we'll cover that in a lot more detail.